ولا مدرسة ولا بلعب معاك ولا حاجة يا شباب. Help me please. حمادة.
Well, that's strange. What happened? Sorry, I have to find my presentation again. Well, this is strange.
ايش يا ماما؟ ايش؟
Well, gentlemen and ladies, if anyone's here, I have something totally, I don't know what has happened. I had a full presentation and it has disappeared into thin air. This is very strange. Okay, no problem. Okay, so who's here tonight?
It looks like it's me, Zargam, and Bilal.
Okay, mashallah. All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Give me one more second because something is very, very strange. My presentation has disappeared into thin air and I don't know why it's not here. We can still do the class tonight, no problem, but it's just, I want to know why my presentation isn't here. Trying to see if I put it under a different name or. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start the recording and we'll kick right in, inshallah. Okay. So the recording has already started? Oh, okay, my bad. All right. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Allahumma rabbana zidna ilma ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batila warzuqna ijtinabah. So I asked you all to begin with the story of Dhul Qarnayn from Surah Al-Kahf. Tonight's presentation is on Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. If you want to become an expert on the subject, then go get yourself this book right here. Can you guys see this book?
Yes, Sheikh.
This is an Islamic view of Gog and Magog in the modern world. So if you never knew, Gog and Magog is the anglicized version of Gog and Magog, which is the Hebrew for Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. Okay. The root of this word Gog and Magog is Ijaj, which is in the Quran several times, using to describe salt water, milhun ujaj. And it's also describes something that burns. So yaf'al wa maf'al is the root word that this is coming from. So one is passive and the other is active. So it means one who burns and one who is burned. Okay. This concept predates the Quran. Gog and Magog are mentioned in the Old and New Testament of the Bible, okay, as the tribes of the north, and that's going to become very important. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go look at Surah Al-Kahf. So Surah 1882. The background information here is that the Prophet ﷺ is asked 3 questions by the Jews. Now, why are Jews asking him questions? Because the Quraysh have come to the Jews and they're asking, why, or how do we know if this man is a real prophet? And they're asking the Jews because the Jews have had prophets before. So they want to know, how do we know this man is a real prophet? And they said, ask him these 3 questions. Ask him about the youths and what happened to them. And then he said, ask them about the ruh, the spirit. And then he said, ask him about the great traveler. Okay? So the great traveler is where Allah answers their question in Surah Al-Kahf. I believe it's, 86? I think this is it. Nope, I went too far. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ. Now, when you go to the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, so you guys ever heard of the book of Daniel? So Daniel is a Nebi for the children of Israel. The 2-horned one of Daniel. Okay. So the king of Babylon has now taken all of the children of Israel into captivity. And while he's there, Allah sends prophets and messengers to the children of Israel, even though they've been kicked out of Jerusalem. And one of them is Daniel. Daniel has a vision, and in it he sees the 2-horned one, which in Hebrew is Ha-Qarnayim. Ha-Qarnayim, which is a direct cognate of the word Dhul Qarnayn, the 2-horned one. Now, what is so fascinating about this, and while the Quran is a miracle, is that all the Jews asked the Prophet Muhammad was about the great traveler. He had no idea who they were talking about, but they knew who they were talking about. And they knew that only Allah knew who they were talking about. There is no way the Prophet could have known. Furthermore, let's just say he understood exactly which traveler they were talking about. He would have to be familiar with the Hebrew language and familiar with the Hebrew scriptures to have known that this was Dhul Qarnayn. Unfortunately, the Prophet had not had any real intimate encounters with Jewish people yet, because Surah Al-Kahf was revealed while he was in Mecca. And it wasn't until he went to Medina that he met Jewish people. So he would not even have heard their scriptures. There is no way he could have known this one time in the entire Old Testament where this term ha-qarnayim is mentioned. So he finds Allah answers the question, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ, they ask you, O Prophet, عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, about Dhul Qarnayn. Okay? Who is Dhul Qarnayn? Ladies and gentlemen, it is none other than this gentleman here. His name is Cyrus the Great. Okay? Why would Cyrus the Great be important to a bunch of Jewish people? Because Cyrus the Great establishes the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And in the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Jews who've been taken into captivity into Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq, are allowed to return back to Jerusalem because of a special decree that Cyrus of Persia makes, that they are allowed to return and rebuild their temple for the second time. That's why they're asking about him. But I want to tell you guys something. This word qarn in the Quran doesn't mean horns. Okay? It can mean horn, but it doesn't. Every single time the Quran uses the word qarn, it only uses it for its other meaning, which is an age or a time or a group of people. Like Allah says about the qurun, the groups of people, or the cities, right? He never ever uses this word in the Quran for horn. So actually, the deeper meaning that we're trying to penetrate here is that Allah is actually telling you about two ages that are going to take place. He tells you the first age. It is an age in which justice and faith are established on the earth. Okay? So we go to the next verse, which is 84. This thing will actually go to it. I think I have to type it in manually each time. Sorry for the slow pace, gentlemen and ladies. Inna makkanna lahu fil ard wa atayna min kulli shay'in sababa. So Allah empowers someone with the ability to rule over the earth. Okay? Now, I'll also let you know a lot of times when Allah uses the word ard in the Quran, he's referring to al-ard al-muqaddisa, the holy land. Take notice when I show you the holy land from Cyrus of Persia, who he conquered. Look at what he conquered. He conquered part of Egypt. He conquered from Babylon all the way to Palestine, and then from Turkey all the way into modern-day Iran and Afghanistan. Okay, so he conquered this land that the Jews consider to be the Holy Land. And then he gave them permission to return. Notice what's going on here. Notice how he traveled between these two seas, but he didn't go any further north. That's going to become very important very soon when we try to identify who are Gog and Magog, who are Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. Okay? So we understand that the term Dhul Qarnayn comes from the Old Testament and that Allah answers them about it. We've identified who we think Dhul Qarnayn is as far as if we wanted to pick an actual person. But we also said that the meaning here is not intended to be a person. It's intended to be a time in history or an age in which the world is ruled by faith and power. Okay? Faith and power. How do we know that? Because the very next verse, Allah tells you about the power that he gave to Dhul Qarnayn. But then he tells you that Dhul Qarnayn had faith. Okay? So he says that Dhul Qarnayn traveled to a place, Ainin Hamiyah, that had dark waters. Okay? Now, if you go to Tafsir Ibn Kathir, you're going to find the dark waters are referred to as the Black Sea. See where I'm pointing right here? You have the Mediterranean Sea here. Right above it is the Black Sea. The Black Sea, its water is not as salty as the Mediterranean. So algae can grow in greater quantities in the Black Sea. Okay? So it has a darker appearance than any other body of water in this area of the world. Okay? So we know from Tafsir Ibn Kathir that the first place he traveled was the Black Sea. Now notice, of course, where is his empire stretching to? Right over here to Turkey. And it said that once he got here, it appeared to him as if the sun was setting in the ocean. Okay? In other words, he had reached the end of the land. Well, actually, if you consider that Allah is using the word land here for the Holy Land, this would be the edge of it, the eastern edge of it. And we know he's not referring to the Mediterranean because the waters are not dark. It's not Ainin Hamia. Okay? And when Allah talks about this, he mentions that Dhul Qarnayn was allowed to punish anyone and reward anyone. And Dhul Qarnayn is going to tell you who he's going to punish and who he's going to reward. Okay? Who are these people? He says, anyone who's a zalim, makes dhulm, he's going to punish them. And then Allah is going to punish them with a terrible punishment in the afterlife. However, and this is where we find out that Dhul Qarnayn is an age of faith. He says, but anyone who has faith, amen. Okay? I'm sorry, the screen is blocking the English translation there. And I didn't realize it has the Russian translation at the top for some reason. So as for him who believes and does righteousness, we will recompense him. Treat him fairly. Okay? So we find out that this age of Dhul Qarnayn, the first age, because it's Dhul Qarnayn, 2 ages. 2 ages. The first age is an age in which power rests on the foundations of faith. Okay? The next thing we find out is that he went another direction. He went to Matli ash-Shams, where the sun rises from. So we go back to Cyrus of Persia and we find out that there's another sea right next to the Black Sea called the Caspian Sea. And once he got there, he couldn't go any further because it's an ocean. And so he saw the sun rising from that area. Okay? And notice that he has his empire stretching right to the Caspian Sea. Now, when he encounters a people there, Allah says about them, "Lam naj'al lahum min duniha sitra," that he did not provide these group of people any kind of covering. So this has been interpreted to mean that they were a people who were living a very simple way of life. You could say the Aboriginal way of life, right? So if you've ever seen Aborigine people, they don't belong to cities and civilizations. They don't build big structures. They wear very simple clothing. We would consider them to be like almost naked. So how did he deal with Aboriginal people? Well, as a person of faith, very simply, kadhalik, he left them as they were. He didn't bother them because they weren't bad, they weren't good. They were just living a simple, natural way of life. Okay? Thus it was. But now he's going to go a third direction. And he's going to encounter the subject for our class tonight. So he goes another direction. Who does he find? إِذَا بَلَغَ بَيْنَ السَّدَّيْنِ, when he goes to a place where there's a saddain. Okay, so this is a between 2 barriers. وَجَدَ مِن دُونِهَا قَوْمًا لَا يَفْقَهُونَ or يَفْكَدُونَ, I'm sorry, لَا يَكَدُونَ يَفْقَهُونَ قَوْلًا. People he cannot understand their language. Okay? He finds a people, he can't understand their language. And these people have a complaint to make. They say, Ya Dhul Qarnayn, Inna Ya'juj wa Ma'juj mufsiduna fil ard. So, O Dhul Qarnayn, no doubt about it, Gog and Magog spread corruption all over the land. So would you make a barrier between us and them? Now, we need to ask ourselves a question at this point. Which direction did he travel now? So we know that Dhul Qarnayn is someone who went to the east, which we identified as the Black Sea. He went to the west. I'm sorry, he went to the west first. He went to the east, which we identify as the Caspian Sea. And then he went another direction, which is only he could have gone south or he could have gone north. Which direction does Allah tell us that Gog and Magog come from? Well, we find one answer in the Hadith tradition, not in the Quran. In the Hadith tradition, the Prophet says that Gog and Magog will pass by the Sea of Galilee. Okay? So let's look for the Sea of Galilee real quick. Sea of Galilee is in Palestine, and it's just north of a city we should all know called Jerusalem. And that's what the Hadith says. They will pass by the Sea of Galilee on their way to Jerusalem, which is down here in the right-hand corner of your screen. And they will drink the water in the Sea of Galilee on their way to Beit al-Maqdis, the Hadith says. So Beit al-Maqdis is Jerusalem. So that means they're coming from the north, guys. They're coming from the north. So the next direction that Dhul Qarnayn travels is to the north, but when he goes to the north, he stops because he meets a people and he can't understand their language. Now let's take notice. What modern day countries are in this area, guys? We have Azerbaijan, Armenia, and an interesting country called Georgia. And we're not talking about the South here, guys. We're talking about the Georgian language. So notice that the country of Georgia has a very interesting language. Go look this up in your free time. But the Georgian language is unlike any other language spoken in that area of the world. It is very, very unique. Very unique. And no one spoke a language like it. So this is the group of people likely that Dhul Qarnayn encountered. And the area he found them was right here, Bain as-Saddain, between two barriers. Would you like to see the barriers, guys? The barriers are called Dariel Gorge. Let's see, where did I put it? There is a mountain range that runs between the Caucasus Mountains, okay? Where are the Caucasus Mountains? I'll show you. They're right here between the two seas, okay? The Caucasus Mountains. And there is only one path that goes through them, and it's called the Dariel Gorge. And guess what it is? It's two barriers on each side. Bain as-Saddain. And they want him to build a wall here because there is a group of people to the north of the Caucasus Mountains, in this area where you see that Dhul Qarnayn never went, Cyrus never went here, who are causing great mischief, right? And we said at the beginning of this class, way back when we first started, that fasad doesn't mean mischief. It means they're corrupting things. And they're corrupting it beyond repair, destroying it, actually. So right here at the Caucasus Mountains, we find the Dariel Gorge. And then Allah goes on to explain more about this place. If we weren't sure that we had found the right place or not, Allah is going to give you more information. Allah tells you that He says He's going to build it, and He's going to put a wall between them. And then when he goes to build the wall, he describes a little bit more about the wall. He says to level up between the two cliffs, and he calls it Bain as-Sadafain. So Sadaf in Arabic means shell. So let's go look at what a shell looks like. This is a shell, guys, an open shell. When you look at Darien Gorge, you find that it looks just like an open shell. And here we find something historical. The historical thing that we find is the Gates of Allen. Now, these are typically attributed to Alexander the Great, and that's why you'll find a lot of people will say when they're talking about Dhul-Qarnayn, they'll say this is Alexander the Great. It doesn't really matter if it was Alexander the Great or Cyrus of Persia. I incline to it being Cyrus of Persia just simply because of his relationship to the Jews. But also Alexander the Great had a relationship with the Jewish people. So that is irrelevant because we said that Allah never uses the word qarn in the Quran except to refer to an age. So in this age where power rests on the foundation of faith, we find that a barrier is built between these mountains. Who is above these mountains? There is a group of people that are so fantastically interesting. And here we find them. They're called the Khazar Empire or the Khazar Cognate. Go look these people up. Very fascinating piece of history. So what do we find? We got the Black Sea here. We got the Caspian Sea here. We got the Caucasus Mountains, we got the Darien Gorge, and we got this kingdom up here called Khazar. Okay? These people were originally pagans. Okay? And they remained this way for a very, very long time until the rise of Islam and the rise of Byzantine Christianity. So Islam would be to the south down here, and Byzantine Christianity would be in this area over here in the Greek, Albania area and Turkey. And both of these empires actually attacked the Khazar on multiple occasions. But they could never defeat them. There's a very interesting hadith in which Allah mentions that at the end of time, Isa alayhi salam will return, and after Isa kills Dajjal, Allah will send against Isa Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. And he says, none can destroy them but I. In other words, Allah has given these people a power, a military power, that cannot be matched by anyone. And what's so fascinating is when you look at history, the Muslims conquered all of the lands to the south here. We're talking about the Persian Empire, eventually the Byzantine Empire. They would go all the way into Turkey. But they could never go past the Caucasus Mountains. They could not beat the Khazar Empire, no matter how hard they tried. Now, what happened next is where this gets so fascinating. The Khazar Empire undergoes a strange religious conversion, a very strange religious conversion. Would you like to see it happen? So let's go to YouTube for a second. We're going to look up a video. Of world religions. Sorry for the commercial content. Watch this video. So, Hinduism begins 3000 BC. Go away, advertisement. And then eventually Ibrahim is born, alayhi salatu wasalam. And then the kingdom of Israel. Notice the color here, guys, blue. See, Judaism, blue. And then Dawood and Suleiman, they form their kingdom here. And then eventually Siddhartha Gautama is born. And Buddhism begins to spread. And then Christianity eventually begins and starts to grow all throughout Europe. See, this is Byzantine Christianity here, or at least the emergence of it. It doesn't officially begin until Constantinople is established. Notice Islam spreads very, very quickly, and then it gets here and can't go past. But look at that blue section. Did you see that? Did you guys see that? You see this up here? Look, Islam goes all the way up here and stops. It can't go any further north, right in the Caucasus Mountains. And then what happens up here? There was no religion up there just a minute ago. Look, none of these world religions were up there just a minute ago. Look, I'm going to play it again. And then all of a sudden when Islam gets there, that blue, see that blue dot right up there? What is that? That is Judaism, guys. What is Judaism doing above the Caucasus Mountains? For some strange reason, around the time Islam reaches the Caucasus Mountains, the kingdom of Khazar decides to undergo a religious conversion. They have three choices. We can become Muslims, in which we will be absorbed into the Islamic empire. We can become Christians, and we'll be absorbed into the Christian empire. Or we can become Jews, and Muslims will have to show us at least some special respect because we're people of the book. And then we'll have at least a slightly closer relationship, religiously speaking, with Christians, because we will no longer be considered pagan by them. So they did not become Jews because of any religious conviction. They became Jews for political reasons. And they were the first non-Israelite people to accept Judaism in massive numbers. Because you got to understand, up until this point, guys, all Jews are descendants of the children of Israel, except a small amount who had converted. Okay? But the Jews had not converted, or there was no non-Israelite group of people on earth who had accepted Judaism in massive numbers, except the Khazar people. Now, I want to tell you guys an interesting hadith. Allah mentions that after Dhul Qarnayn builds his barrier, that Ya'juj and Ma'juj can't get past the barrier. They can't go south. And every day they will come and try to knock the barrier down. And they'll get almost through it and they'll say, okay, we'll come back tomorrow and work on it some more. And when they come back the next day, the barrier is just as good as it was before. Until a day comes that they say, at the end of the day, after working on the barrier, they say, we'll come back tomorrow, inshallah, God willing. And then the barrier collapses. They come back the next day, and the work they did the day before was still there. In other words, they can now progress through the barrier. And what's so fascinating is that the only other religion I'm aware of that has this concept of invoking God about the next day is Judaism and Christianity. All of the Abrahamic religions have the concept of inshallah, God willing. Tomorrow it'll happen. So the moment that the Khazar people became an Abrahamic religion, in this case Judaism, they could no longer be contained behind the wall. Now what's even more fascinating is in the life of the prophet. The prophet had a dream one night that troubled him deeply. He woke up and he told his daughter Fatima, he said, today a hole has been made in the barrier of Dhul Qarnayn, and he held up his hand like this, like to show a hole. And then he said, Waylul lil Arab, that woe to the Arabs of an evil that comes close to them. Now, if you want to really get a good understanding of this subject, you don't need to go anywhere else than the following book, the 13th tribe. So you know that children of Israel had 12 tribes, according to the Quran. So Arthur Kessler, he wrote this book. He's a Jew, by the way, to tell you the history of the 13th tribe, which is the Khazar people. And the main argument he makes in his book is that the white-skinned European Jews, which are typically referred to as Ashkenazi Jews, which make up 9 out of 10 of the Jews that you're going to meet on earth today, that they were the descendants of the Khazar people, that they have no relationship to the children of Israel whatsoever. And that they make up all or most of the European Jews in Germany and Russia and the Balkans and different areas like that. That they're not Semitic people at all. And what's so fascinating is when you read his book, and I've read all of his book, he says that when the rabbis of Spain learned that there was this empire above the Caucasus Mountains who converted to Judaism, they asked them questions. And of course, Jews are very interested in your lineage. Who's your dad? Who's your mom? Especially your mom, because if your mom is a Jew, then they're a Jew. And they traced their lineage all the way back to guess who? The tribes mentioned in the book of Genesis, in the Old Testament of the Bible, called Ya'juj wa Ma'juj, Gog and Magog. So they themselves admit, the Khazar people, that they can trace their lineage back to the tribes of Gog and Magog. And we've already said that the Quran identifies the area where Gog and Magog are located. We went through all the evidence from Surah Al-Kahf. But now we go to Surah Al-Anbiya, and we find such a fascinating verse of the Quran. Allah says, وَحَرَامٌ عَلَى قَرْيَةٍ أَهْلَكْنَاهَا أَنَّهُمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ. That we have made haram on the cities, or a city that we destroyed, that they are not allowed to return to it. حَتَّى إِذَا فُتِحَتْ يَأْجُوجَ وَمَأْجُوجَ وَهُمْ مِنْ كُلِّ حَدَبٍ يَنْسِلُونَ. Until we release Gog and Magog, and from every place of advantage they will descend. What is so fascinating about this verse is that generally the tafsir will tell you that any city Allah destroys, the people are not allowed to come back to it. But there's one exception to that mentioned in the Quran, and only one exception to my knowledge, and that is a very special city called Jerusalem. In the city of Jerusalem, we find this very interesting quote from Surah Al-Baqarah. And it is the story of what's generally referred to as Prophet Ezra, or the righteous man Ezra, Uzair. So Allah says, O kalladhi marra ala qaryatin, same word here, qarya, wa hiya khawiyatun ala urushiha, qala anna yuhyi hadhihi lahu ba'da mawtiha. So this is referring to a part of the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah where Uzair, who brings children of Israel out of Babylon back to Jerusalem to rebuild it for the second time,
Did he freeze?
Yeah, I couldn't hear him too. So maybe his internet.
What happened?
We couldn't hear you for a bit.
Yeah.
How long have we been gone?
I think just few seconds, like maybe 20 seconds, I
Okay,
think.
what's the last thing y'all heard me say?
Um, I actually forgot. I think it was about.
So did you understand when I was talking about how Allah makes one exception to the
Yeah,
rule of when he destroys? Okay. So
yeah. You
that
were
one
saying that.
exception is
Yeah,
Jerusalem. Are you guys still there?
Yes, we
yeah,
are.
yeah.
Okay.
I think the last thing you're talking about was Ezra coming back to Jerusalem.
Right. So Ezra, he's the one being allegedly talked about here in this particular verse of the Quran. And Allah says that there is one city that is destroyed that the people will come back to life. Now, I'm going to give you guys a special secret here. I think this is referring to Ezekiel chapter 37, where Ezekiel has the vision of the valley of bones. You can look that up on your own free time. Either way, it's referring to the same event, which is that after Jerusalem is destroyed, it's allowed to be rebuilt again. Okay. But classical tafsirs will say this is referring to Ezra, and knowledge of the Bible will tell you it's Ezekiel. Okay. Doesn't matter though. Not important to our subject. Point is that Allah makes an exception. Now let's go back to our verses of the Quran that talk about Gog and Magog. Allah says that Gog and Magog will be a sign for which the people of the destroyed city will be allowed to return. So I'm going to tell you guys something about Arthur Kessler's book. His book, 13th Tribe, he details how these people of the Khazar Empire who convert to Judaism around the same time that Islam arrives at the Caucasus Mountains, these people become very messianic. They get messianic fervor, which means they want to go back to the Middle East. Of course, they're not even from the Middle East. They're from Turkish tribes in the north of the Caucasus Mountains. They're basically Indo-European people. And they want to establish a state in Israel. He also mentions that these people eventually spread into Europe and they marry into Byzantine Christianity. So they enter into Christianity and they enter into Judaism. But notice, guys, remember my point is that they didn't do it for religious reasons. They did it for political power. So they're not sincere in their faith. They only appear on the outside to have embraced religion, but internally, they are basically hypocrites, kafir. So you guys know that for the overwhelming majority of history, Jews and Christians hated each other. Christians hated Jews because they said that you killed the Messiah. And Jews hated Christians because when Christians got power, they persecuted Jews like crazy. And I mean, all you got to do is look at European history to see that the Jews have been massacred numerous times by European peoples who were Christian. And they typically found refuge in the Muslim world, interestingly enough, until a certain time in history comes when Jews and Christians, at least some Christians, join hands together and they form something called Zionism. So Zionism takes different flavors. You have Zionism in Judaism, which is the messianic fervor I told you about, and you have Zionist Christians. So Christian Zionism and Jewish Zionism. all seek to rebuild and establish a state in Israel. What allowed the two former enemies to join hands? It is because Gog and Magog entered into their ranks. Ya'juj wa Ma'juj entered into Western Christianity primarily and into Judaism. They outnumber all the other Jews on earth. And so their political power over the Jewish religion is much higher than the Sephardic Jews or the Yemeni Jews or the Middle Eastern Jews, who are a minority. And it just so happens that they would eventually reestablish a state in Israel. Now, of course, this is not holy Israel. This is a imposter state. But where do they begin their mission? Primarily in Western Europe, where the Crusades would eventually start. And of course, what are the Crusades about? Taking over Jerusalem. And this particular time, notice the island that we mentioned last week in our lesson, where Dajjal begins his mission. He begins it from the island of Britain. What do you find on the island of Britain, guys? Oh my goodness. You find the statues of Gog and Magog. Now, they were actually destroyed partially during World War II, but then they were rebuilt. Go look this up. It's very, very interesting. So, who is the nation responsible for the Balfour Declaration? The declaration that gives Jews the right to return to the Holy Land after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It is none other than Britain. And who are the Jews responsible for that? It is the Rothschild family. White, European, Ashkenazi Jews. Most likely descendants of the Khazar Empire. And what does Allah say about these people? He's going to give them power that no one can match. What does Britain do, guys? Goes all over the world and conquers it. And no one can stop them. No one. And when they go all over the world, what does Britain do? Britain invades your education system. It invades your culture. It invades everything because it doesn't want to rule over you directly. That's only the first thing it does. It invades your country, it takes it over, but it knows that eventually you will rebel. So what it does is it just installs its systems. And then it gets people who look like the people of the land it's conquered to rule over under the appearance of being natives, but whose allegiances remain to Britain, and Britain's systems of economy and education and politics remain the systems of that land. So they gradually convert you into them without you even realizing it, using deception. Sounds very Dajjalic, doesn't it? So Dajjal and Gog and Magog work together. Because what is Gog and Magog? They are people who would eventually become Jewish. They would eventually become Messianic. They would enter into European lands. They would eventually become the elite of the world. And today we have Jerusalem poised to become the ruling state in the world. All Israel has to do at this point is wage some pretty big wars against the Arabs, and they will control the land between the Nile and the Euphrates, which they consider to be the Holy Land. And that's the last step. That's why the prophet has the vision where he spoke to the Arabs. If you want to see the future of the Arab people, all you have to do is look at Palestine. Look at how the modern day Ashkenazi Jews treat Palestinians. And that's what the future is for Syria, Iraq, Northern Arabia, Egypt. That's exactly how they're going to treat them when they take over those lands. So Gog and Magog, guys, in a nutshell, and we say, of course, Allah knows best, are not, as some people have said, the Chinese. And I'm not even saying they're the British. I'm saying that they are a group of people who would eventually come into the ranks of primarily Western Europe. They would form modern Western civilization, which would go all throughout the world, conquering it and converting it into themselves. Because the most famous hadith we have about Ya'juj and Ma'juj mentions that on the Day of Judgment, Allah will ask Adam, the Prophet Adam, take from your offspring 999 out of 1,000 for the hellfire. And the companions were very, very troubled by this statement. They said, who will make it to Jannah? And the Prophet said, don't worry, it's 999 from Ya'juj wa Ma'juj and one from you. So that tells you that Ya'juj and Ma'juj are a large number of people. Now, typically, the tafsirs you read about Ya'juj and Ma'juj is that Muslim scholars were saying that, oh, this is some group of people underneath the earth, and there's just millions and millions of them, and eventually, after the time Jesus comes back, they're going to pour out of the ground, and this miraculous event, and then all of a sudden Allah is going to destroy them. And that it's only something that happens at the end of time. The problem is that contradicts all the other hadith about, number one, there's no reason for us to believe Gog and Magog are underground. There's nothing in the hadith tradition or Quran that mentions that they're under the ground. It says they're above the ground very clearly. The Prophet mentioned that there was already a hole in the barrier of Dhul Qarnayn during his own lifetime. We've already identified who they are from the geography of the Quran. We know who these people are. We know that they're going to say, inshallah, one day. We know that these people converted to Judaism. We know who these people are. It's very clear and very obvious. But how do they become so numerous is the question we have to ask. That 999 out of 1,000 people are going to the Jahannam because they are included in Ya'juj and Ma'juj. All you need to do is remember one hadith of the Prophet. The Prophet says anyone who imitates a people is from them. Okay? And the word he uses is not, it doesn't just mean you have things in common with them. It means you're actually trying to be like them. You're going out of your way to imitate their culture, their lifestyle, their dress, their clothing, their education, their way of life. And that's exactly what the rest of the world is doing with Western Europe today. Everyone wants to be like Western Europeans who would eventually conquer America. Everyone wants to dress like them, be like them, have the same culture, and they abandon their own natural cultures and way of life and practices and education systems and so forth and so on. So that's why Ya'juj and Ma'juj become so numerous. It's not because there is an actual genetic tribe of people who's just going to breed and breed and breed until they make up like a massive number of people that outnumbers everyone on earth today. No, it's because people are going to imitate them. They're going to become Ya'juj and Ma'juj through their behavior. And what's the number one trait we know of Ya'juj and Ma'juj from the Quran? قَالُوا يَا ذَا الْقَرْنَيْنِ إِنَّ يَأْجُوجَ وَمَأْجُوجَ مُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. They will corrupt the earth. And all you have to do is look at the lifestyle of the modern man. Our lifestyle is incredibly destructive to the earth. Everything we do is polluting and trashing the world around us. And if you look at modern society, it's extremely corrupt. The money's corrupted with riba, with interest. The sports industry is corrupted with alcohol and indecency. The political system is corrupted with shirk. What used to be what they called theocracies have all been destroyed and been replaced with man as the highest level of law giving. In other words, we can call the modern political economic system that's dominate the world, the Gog and Magog world order, or as it's been aptly named by George Bush, the New World Order. And in conclusion tonight, I recommend that all of you take some time after tonight's lesson to go get a copy of Arthur Kessler's book, The 13th Tribe. I suggest you all get a copy of this book by Imran Hussein, An Islamic View of Ya'juj in the Modern World. I suggest you all go look up the Khazar Empire. And I suggest that you all read Surah Al-Kahf every Friday, because it is the surah that Allah says to the Prophet will protect us from Dajjal. Why? Because it contains in it information that will help us understand and identify who are Ya'juj and Ma'juj, how are they related to Dajjal, and that they're not just a sign of the hour that will only affect people at the end of the world, that they are infecting us today. And so my recommendation to you as brothers and sisters in Islam is, now that you know who they are, don't be like them. Otherwise, you're going to be included amongst them. There are many Muslims today who are imitating Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And all of us are to some extent. But knowledge is power. Now that you know who they are, you know who not to be like. So what I've presented to you tonight is, we say Allah and His Messenger know best. You know, we're just trying to do our best to try to identify this subject and understand it. If we're wrong, then that's okay. But if we're correct, then this is information that we should share with our friends and family, because it will help them understand the modern world a whole lot better. And it may not be something that you're going to find at the local masjid or in your local community, but that's because, to some extent, guys, like I said, for the last 500 years, the Muslim Ummah has been basically regurgitating what the Muslim Ummah said 1400 years ago. We've just been saying what other people already said. And there's been a lot of new information that's come since then. And what we have to do today is look at the world around us and go back to the Quran and the Hadith and try to understand how these things can explain the world today. And it's not that the people before us that were saying their opinions and what they thought about this verse of the Quran or this Hadith are wrong. No, it's that they didn't have the information we have today. If they were alive today, they would have come to very different conclusions about this information. So it's our job in this generation to go back and look at these verses of the Quran and look at these Hadith and make them relevant to the Muslim world today. If you go back to the tafsir books, like I said, you're going to find the more you learn about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, it sounds like Disney World. If there's some tribe of people living underground that are all going to pour out of the ground in the millions and billions after Jesus comes back. And it really doesn't give any relevance to the subject today. But that doesn't mean that the people who came before us were wrong or incorrect or ignorant or anything. No, they just didn't know about all these things that we do today. They hadn't yet seen this tribe of people that converted to Judaism above the Caucasus Mountains. They may not have even yet understood exactly who the characters in the Quran being talked about were. But I'll end tonight with the important thing for you to understand. When I said that Allah calls this man, which we said is a metaphor for ages, Dhul Qarnayn, He tells us the first Qarn, which is the time when power rests on the foundation of faith. When power in the second Qarn, because it's Qarnayn, the next time power will rest on the foundations of Dhulm. And that Dhulm will come from Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And if you look today, the Western European powers, Britain, France, America, Germany, who do they support all over the world? Almost inevitably dhulm. Every leader that they support and prop up is a zalim, hands down, without exception. And anyone who rebels against their system, whether you're Hugo Chavez in Venezuela or you're the leader of modern day North Korea, or anyone who doesn't go along with their system, then you are demonized as a zalim. They'll call you a zalim, even though the whole time they're making dhulm on everyone and supporting the oppressors all over the world. So the age we live in today is the qarn, the age of dhulm, the age of oppression, the age of fasad, of corruption, which is the opposite of the first age, in which power rests on the foundations of faith. Notice that the first qarn, when Dhul Qarnayn encountered native peoples, how did he treat them? He left them alone. How does modern day Western European powers treat native people when they encounter them? They massacre them. They genocide them. They kill them and they take their resources. It's the exact opposite response. How does the second Qarn treat people of faith when it encounters them? Does it reward them? No, it punishes people of faith. Right? And that's exactly what it's doing to, or what it did to Orthodox Christianity, what it did to Islam, and what it does to actual real Jews, Semitic Jews. And how does it treat people who make dhulm and fasad? It gives them power. So we live in the exact opposite age of the first Qarn today. So we'll end here. It's been it's been about exactly 1 hour, and I'll entertain some questions, comments, and concerns. Bismillah. Nobody has any questions.
Oh, sorry, Sheikh. My mic was muted. I actually had one question from the last lecture from the homework. Is that fine to ask?
Go ahead.
So I was looking up this one scientist about I was looking into the history of the weather forecast, and let me see if I have his name right. So I'm not giving you the wrong name. It was. Yeah, so his name was Robert Fitzroy, and I was trying to look into his personal life, and evidently there's not much known about his personal life, but on Wikipedia, it does say that he made some pretty incredible predictions on a daily basis as to what the weather could be, and there was really no basis for that. It just kind of started happening out of nowhere, but when it started happening, that's when he started creating an official system that developed into the weather system forecast we have today. So I don't know if that was indicative of the dealings with the gel, and if that had anything to do with it. So it's just something that to bring up. But in terms of this lecture, though, I did have a question about Dhul Qarnayn, but it's a little bit of a long question, so I'll let anyone else, if they have a question, I'll let them go first.
So I'll address your concern. So about the scientist.
Sure.
You got to remember that Suleiman alayhi salam was given power over the shayateen. So if Dajjal wants the throne of Suleiman, then one of the things he wants is power over the shayateen. And so the shayateen are how Dajjal is able to communicate with human beings during the stages of his mission we mentioned. So he's on the earth for a day, which is like a year, a day, which is like a month, a day, which is like a week. And then finally, in our world of time and space, where he's an actual human, days like our days. So during these periods of time, how do you reach Dajjal? Through the spiritual world, okay? So these scientists, they contact the shayateen, and the shayateen communicate with them. And one of the things the shayateen can do is they can travel very quickly. They can travel far distances. And what would that enable you to do? Well, if you're in one city and someone's in another city far to the east or far to the west, and there's a storm system coming, they can come to you very quickly and tell you there's a storm coming. Okay? So we don't know about this particular scientist, but that could have easily been what he was doing, as he was simply using the jinn, the shayateen, to predict when weather was coming, wind or snow or rain or ice or whatever, like temperature drops and rises, right? Because the jinn can go up into the atmosphere. Allah mentions that in the Quran, that they try to go up and snatch information that's coming down. So they would have the ability to inform people of the weather that's coming. And then eventually a technology could be developed. Now, I would be willing to guess that the technology comes from Dajjal, because Dajjal has to build a system that he can come and rule over. But the original predictions that you said that there was no basis for them could very well be from him contacting the shayateen.
Gotcha.
So does Zargam or Dawood have any questions? If not, I'll go ahead and ask your question about Dhul Qarnayn.
I have a question. You can go below.
It's a little bit of a long question, so I don't want to. Well, maybe it's not, but
Go ahead, Bismillah.
okay. So, you said before, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Dhul Qarnayn could very well be, if not is, or was Cyrus the Great, and that was alluding from the Old Testament. So, and I want to be very careful when I ask this question. So, as Muslims, it's understandable that we believe in the Torah and the Bible. We believe that there's some truth to these books. And so it's definitely not in our nature to condemn them, like how Christians and Jews condemn the Quran, because they don't believe in the Quran at all. And so my question is, when it comes to understanding these types of concepts, such as Dhul Qarnayn, are we encouraged to look into like passages from the Bible and the Torah to try to see if we can, I guess, but like at the same time not go too much to where we'll start questioning our own deen?
My answer is absolutely yes. I mean, I don't even know why a Muslim would not look at the Bible.
I think because the way we've been raised, at least for me in Sunday school and just in general, just in the Muslim community, we're always encouraged, like, if you have any questions, go to the Quran. Don't look at the Bible. Don't look at the Torah. Have nothing to do with it. And I've always questioned that. I was like, but we believe that our prophets received those books. We should look at the history. We should see what happened, why this says that or why that doesn't say that.
Not only that,
So-
Allah literally tells you to do stuff like that in the Quran. He says, "Siru fil ard," like travel through the earth. Why would you travel through the earth? Just for the sake of traveling? No, to see what's happened on the earth, to see the peoples before you, to see what he says. Siru fil ard, like travel through the earth to see what happened to the people before you. Okay.
Mhm.
What generally is confused in the Muslim community is that there is a hadith in which Omar radiallahu anh brings the Torah to the Prophet. And he says, look, I have pages of the Torah. Let's read them. And the Prophet tells him, like, Omar, why do you need to look at the Torah when you have Allah's messenger here and the Quran is coming down? Okay.
Mhm.
Now, what the Prophet meant by that, and Allah knows best, is he was telling Omar, like, let the Quran finish coming down and then study it and learn it, then go to the Torah later. But right now, our focus as an ummah is the Quran. Meaning, become a student of the Quran first. Read it fully, understand its history, how it came to you, what it's talking about. Then once you have a firm grasp on your own deen, then you follow the command of the Quran to travel through the earth and see what's come before you. And the Quran says explicitly that it came to complete the previous scriptures. It mentions the Torah by name. It mentions the Injil by name. Not only that, it tells you that it's muhaiminin alay. It is like a light by which you can look into the previous scriptures and find all the truth that's in them. The idea that somehow if I read anything outside of the Quran, it's going to corrupt my faith is very strange to me, unless you didn't have a firm faith to begin with. Now, do you understand?
Yes.
That's what your parents in Sunday school were trying to warn you about initially when you were young, is they were like, stick with the Quran, okay? Because you didn't understand your faith yet. And if you had gone to the Torah or the gospel or something else, it probably would have confused you initially because you didn't have a good foundation first. But now that you're an adult and you have a full rational mind and you can think for yourself and you can read the Quran and study it and you have a firm grasp on what Islam is, of course, go look at what the Torah says. Go look at what the gospels say. And you're going to immediately see where the problems are, where things have been misinterpreted or changed. Right?
Mhm.
But you're also going to see all the truth that's there. And you're going to have a much deeper understanding of the Quran because you're going to understand a lot of times what the Quran is referring to.
Gotcha. Yeah, that was one thing I considered when asking the question, because there are so many references that I've noted from the Bible and the Torah that specifically are addressed in the Quran.
Right. Just the fact why Allah uses Dhul Qarnayn. Why didn't he just call him Cyrus of Persia? Right? Because he wanted to hit the Jews right in the heart. And not just any Jews, the Jews that knew the Torah. Because the book of Daniel is a very interesting book in that it's in two languages. Some of it is in Aramaic and some of it is in Hebrew. And this term, Dhul Qarnayn or Ha Qarnayim in Hebrew, only occurs one time in the whole Bible. There's no way the prophet would have known it. So Allah wanted to put such an impression on the Jews that this guy is a prophet. And you know he's a prophet now because he said this word that you know from your scriptures because you're a scholarly Jew that no one even knows in your own community except you. In other words, he gave an answer in such a way that would have left a really deep impression on the Jews who gave the Quraysh that questions to ask him. And only a prophet would have known that. No person would have known that. So, but remember, the point of our lesson tonight, I don't want you to be concerned with who Dhul Qarnayn was. I want you to be concerned about the message Allah is trying to give you about Dhul Qarnayn, which is the two ages. The ages of power resting on the foundations of faith, and the age of Gog and Magog, in which power rests on the foundations of shirk and dhulm and oppression and fasad, which is the world we live in today. The Gog and Magog world order. Because too oftentimes Muslims get involved in these debates over like the hair-splitting issues. Well, Dhul Qarnayn is Cyrus of Persia. No, he's Alexander the Great. No, he's this, he's that. Who cares? Like that's what is Allah trying to tell you with these verses is the point you should be trying to figure out. I think it's important. I think it's important to identify who Dhul Qarnayn is in order to identify who Ya'juj and Ma'juj are. But I also think it's important to look at the metaphorical aspect of those verses so that we understand when we live in an age of universal fasad and universal dhulm and universal corruption and shirk, we know we're living in the age of Gog and Magog. So both the metaphorical and the literal aspects of those verses enlighten us.
Does that also apply to the description of Dajjal? Like, instead of trying to pinpoint who exactly it's going to be, looking for a person with one eye, but instead of doing all that, look for other signs that come with that, like people having instruments on their head, or accepting immorality, doing so many things that are historically been taboo and now they're publicly acceptable.
Bingo, man. Bingo, bingo, bingo. You know you're living in the time of Dajjal when you see all this other signs around you. Because what are the signs? They're signs of the hour. What is the major signs of the hour? Dajjal. He's the number one mentioned on the list. So when you see the women dressed and yet are naked, when you see people with instruments on their heads, when you see the Arabs building tall buildings, when you see, we could go on and on and on. You know you're living in the time of Dajjal. I mean, it's very clear. You don't need to have to see a one-eyed cyclops with kafir written on his forehead to know you're living in the time of Dajjal. You can do exactly what you just said. You can just see all the other signs around you, and you already know. You already know.
And that's why it's extra important to be cautious and strengthen our faith in this time.
Yeah, you're living, gentlemen, you're and any ladies who watch this later, you're living in the greatest fitna that mankind has ever encountered. I mean, no people in the history of the world have ever dealt with the fitna that you and I are dealing with today. None. The challenges to our faith are so all-encompassing today that it's really unbelievable. It's amazing that there are even people left on earth today that have any faith. Because there's not a single aspect of society, education, government, politics, economy that has not become corrupted. Nothing. And the secularism and materialism has driven so many people out of faith. I mean, you guys know that the fastest growing religion in the world is the nuns, the non-affiliated, unreligious people. That's the fastest growing religion on earth, is people leaving religion. And to be a person who has faith today, you truly understand, or I've come to understand the hadith where the Prophet said to the companions, you know, I long to see my like these people who are going to come in the future, whose deeds will be like worth 50 of your deeds. And the companions are like, you know, who are these people? You know, and he said that there'll be people, you know, you're here with me. You see me. I'm a prophet. I'm in front of your face. But these will be people who they just heard about me. They heard my teachings. They heard the Quran. They heard who I was, and they still believed in me. And they're going to be dealing with such fitna that you never had to deal with. The Sahaba didn't have to deal with Gog and Magog. They didn't have to deal with Dajjal's system like we do today. They had to deal with Dajjal because obviously they dealt with what's his name, Ibn Sayyad, who the Prophet thought was Dajjal. And to some extent, Dajjal's system was in place even during the time of the Prophet, but not nearly to the extent that it is today. You know, what we're dealing with, brothers and sisters, is really unbelievable. It's a very, very difficult time to be a person of faith. And that's why the Prophet said that during that time, a truthful person will be called a liar, and a liar will be called truthful. You know, you can literally go to people today and try to tell them this information, and they'll tell you you're crazy. They'll tell you you're a liar. They'll tell you all kinds of things, and you're like, no, I'm not. I'm telling you the truth. And there's so many examples I could mention, but that's the world we live in today. People have become so deceived by Dajjal and so deceived by the Gog and Magog world order that they can't even think rationally anymore. And so the people who are trying to teach them the truth and tell them the truth, they're enemies. It's an amazing time to live in. But
yeah, I actually have the hadith that you were talking about, the one about the 50 rewards. I was gonna
right.
ask you about it. So in the
You muted your mic. We can't hear you.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so in the hadith it says the messenger of Allah, or peace and blessings be upon him, said, you must enjoin good and forbid evil until you see greed being obeyed, desires being followed, worldly life being preferred, and everyone is impressed by their own opinion. Then you must take care of yourself and leave the common people. Verily, ahead of you are days of patience, in which patience will be like grasping a hot cold. That one, the one who does good deed in that time will have the reward of like 50 men who do likewise. So the I guess the most important thing I want to point out here, it says then you must take care of yourself and leave the common people. Like, what does that exactly mean?
Well, at the beginning of the hadith, and Allah knows best, he mentions amr bil ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar, enjoining good and forbidding evil. So like our ummah, Allah says in the Quran, A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim, kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. You're the best nation ever raised up for mankind. Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhawna anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah ila al-akhir al-ayah. Which means the reason you're so great is because you command the good and you forbid the evil. So our nation was meant to establish a kingdom of God on earth in which the rules that God had laid down through his revelation were the rules of the land, and the evils that would corrupt that were kept at bay. And the prophet is telling you about a time that's going to come in the future where you can't even do that. That if you try to do amr bil ma'ruf, enjoining good, wa nahi anil munkar, and forbidding evil, that you won't succeed. So the only thing you can do during that time is do it to yourself. Like keep yourself away from as much evil as possible and enjoin on yourself as much good. Because if you try to do it to anyone else, they will rebel against you. And we can find this, I mean, I'm sure you guys have had this experience in your own families. Like, for example, a lot of Muslims will tell me that if they become religious in their families, that they become persecuted by their family. Their mom, if a sister puts on hijab, like all of a sudden her mom is like, well, what's wrong with you? Don't go out with hijab and don't do this and don't do that. Or if like a son goes to his father and he's like, hey dad, why don't you pray? And then father starts cursing him, like, who are you to ask me about prayer? I'm a Muslim. My name is Muhammad. Like my dad read Quran, I don't. So you find that people like hate you because you're trying to tell them to do good, and you're trying and you try to tell them, hey, don't smoke cigarettes, don't buy this house on interest, dad, don't do this, and they're like, get away from me, like don't tell me to stay away from evil, and that's the world we live in today. You try to tell people to do good, they rebel against you. You try to stop them from doing evil, they rebel against you. And so what you're left with is just yourself. And ideally, your nuclear family, like your wife and children. That's about the extent of what you can control. And even with them, maybe you can't even control them. Maybe they're going to rebel against you also. And that's the case of people of faith today. And it's it's sad to see, because it's people that you love, but you see them going astray and you have no control over it. Even the prophet mentioned that the last people to go out to Dajjal will be women, and a man will forcibly tie down his wife and his daughter to keep them away from Dajjal. And he'll come home and they'll have undone the ties and gone out to Dajjal. Meaning that the brainwashing that Dajjal will do to women in the future will be so great that even physically restraining them from doing the evil that Dajjal will invite them to will not work. Imagine that's deep brainwashing. That's how mind-controlled women will become. That there's literally nothing you can do to save them. To the extent that the prophet said that they'll become the greatest number of people in the hellfire. That's not a sign that there's anything wrong with women. No, that's a sign that Dajjal will specifically attack them. Because if you attack women, you attack the very most important part of a family unit. And if you can destroy the family or unit, you can destroy any society. If you can corrupt women, you corrupt everybody, because women are the vessel through which the souls of men come into this world. So you've corrupted the root of the tree. That's why Dajjal attacks women more than he does men. He wants them to become corrupted so that through them the men are corrupted. And that they end up being the majority of the people in the hellfire. Not, once again, because there's anything wrong with women. That's anyone who thinks that is a fool. It's because of Dajjal's attack on women is greater than men.
Alhamdulillah, I was actually thinking the exact same thing while you were saying that. Like, it kind of goes back to that cheesy phrase where happy wife, happy life. But like, giving a little bit of thought to it, it actually makes sense. Woman is the most important part of the family unit, and if the woman is upset or not happy or things are not supposed to be going the way they should be, then the rest of everything else will just fall apart. And so they have it a lot harder. And so I guess if they're more prone to being brainwashed by the Dajjal, it's just going to spell trouble for all of humanity.
I mean, guys, that's what the feminist movement is. It's a Dajjalic attack on women, disguised as women's liberation. Remember, we said when we look at the word Dajjal, it comes from Dejala, which is tar that was rubbed on a mangy camel to make it appear to be healthy when it was actually sick. So Dajjal's whole attack on everything is going to be giving you something that looks nice, but internally it is corrupt. So feminism looks great on the surface to women because it's like, oh, this is empowering me and giving me rights and blah, 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 blah. But it totally corrupts them. It destroys families because it inverts the roles of men and women, the natural roles of men and women. Every society on earth outside of the human community has natural roles for men and women. Ants, monkeys, dolphins, doesn't matter. They have natural roles. One doesn't try to be like the other. And humans have a natural role for men and women. It's just natural that women do certain things and men do certain things. It doesn't mean one's better than the other. They're complementary. But feminism seeks to invert the roles. It says, no. You're actually supposed to be a man. To the extent now that it's gone to the point where women are trying to literally be men physically by having surgeries. And if you do that to the family unit, you will create chaos because a family unit is designed to naturally function, and you invert the roles of the people. Now you have two males and no female in actuality. So the feminine aspect of women is actually taken away from them by feminism. It actually does the opposite to them that they think it does. It doesn't empower them, it inverts them. And that's why Satanists, they worship inverted symbols. So they'll take a pentagram and they'll invert it upside down. And they'll take a cross from Christianity and they'll invert it upside down. Because they're worshiping the inversion of the natural world, which is what Dajjal wants. That's what he is. He's the inversion of the Messiah. He's the opposite of the Messiah. He's the lying, deceiving Messiah, not the truthful, spiritual Messiah that is Jesus Christ. So today, that's what you see, an inversion of everything. And that hadith that we said before we ever started this class, we went through that hadith, Ya ibn Mas'ud, like innama al-a'malu wa ashratiha, like what are the signs of the hour? And it was all inversions, like water that burns, children full of rage, the truthful being called liars, liars being called truthful. Like it's all inversions. So when you see these inversions all around you, you know you're dealing with Dajjal because he's the inversion of the Messiah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Like, even Islam promotes men and women are equal, but that does not mean man is better than woman or woman is better than man. And identical.
This is the easiest way to put it. Men and women are equal. They're not the same.
Identical, exactly. Yeah.
They're not the same. There are over 3,000 physiological differences between a male and a female. Over 3,000 documentable, observable, physical differences. We're not the same, but we're equal.
Man was put on earth to do what a woman cannot, and a woman was put on earth to do what a man cannot. That's, I forgot where I heard that from, but I think that's
Complementary roles.
exactly, yeah, complementary roles.
That's why a woman is half your deen. Because you literally can't even access that other 50% without a woman. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go to Jannah without a wife, right? Because we have examples throughout history. Imam an-Nawawi, I believe Ibn Taymiyyah never got married. But you'll never be able to have children of your own without a wife. And so you're going to be missing out on so many opportunities to grow spiritually and to grow internally and to grow closer to Allah. And that's why it's half your deen. So this is, once again, what's the inverted world is going to tell you Islam is wrong, Islam is oppressive, Islam says this about women and men. No, anyone who sincerely looks into our faith realizes very quickly that women have a very prominent role in our faith. They're half your deen. They deserve 3 times more attention than the father. They have an entire chapter, one of the largest in the entire Quran, named after them. And there's no single chapter named Rijal, men. So it's just fascinating. The inverted world tells you the inversion of reality. So it tells you Islam is bad when in reality Islam is the truth. That's how you know you're living in the time of Dajjal. Okay, gentlemen, we've gone 30 minutes into this Q&A session, and my family needs a little bit of my attention. So, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Oh Allah, we ask you to accept this dars that we've gone through tonight. We ask you to ربنا زدنا علما, increase us in beneficial knowledge. And we نعوذ بالله من علم لا ينفع. We seek refuge in you from any information that's not beneficial. We ask you وثبتنا اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. Keep our hearts firm upon the faith of truth, deen al-haq. And we ask you to let us see truth as truth and follow it, and falsehood as falsehood and keep us away from it, and to let us see things as they really are. Allahumma arina al-ashya'a kama hi. And we ask you finally to send peace and blessings to exalt the mention of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to put love for him in our hearts and in our families' hearts. And we ask you, O Allah, to accept from us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum assalam.